All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the awesome introduction. So today I'm going to, oh my God, it doesn't look good. Thank you for sharing that with me. Okay, this is better. All right, so I will talk about accessibility and more importantly, accessibility in single page applications. Accessibility is an often overlooked item for us as developers. We do not care a lot about it, honestly, right? But I think it's super important. And today I'm going to explain to you why it is important, what principles are behind there, what guidelines you have, and also how you can get started with accessibility as a front-end developer. So my name is Bob. I'm a technology lead at ING. We still do release trains, but we're going into micro front-end soon to make our teams autonomously develop their stuff and ship it to production whenever they want. That's what I'm working on. Next to that, working on a lot of things. As a technology lead, I'm responsible for the strategy of the front end within the Netherlands and Belgium. And it's a cool job. I love my job. Furthermore, I've been a developer myself for many, many years. I've done jQuery, Backbone, all of it. So yeah, that's me. But let's talk about why accessibility is important. So first of all, it's really about making your website or web application to be used to literally everyone. So no exclusions. And that's for us at ING is very important because we do not want to accept people out of our applications. We do not want to discriminate, essentially. But I think many of you have the same feeling, right? We want to make sure that everyone can use our products. Next to that, maybe not the best reason to start with it, but it's an important one. There are regulations in place nowadays, and there are also examples of lawsuits towards companies. Yeah, it's a requirement nowadays, guys. It's true. So this is not the best reason to start with it. I think this is the best reason. It's an exciting new part of your challenge as a developer. So it's fun to learn new things, and it's fun to get started with accessibility. I'll show you in this presentation. So accessibility is really about taking a look from different angles, different perspectives on our application. So one example might be that you always want to use your application, like in the morning, at night, when it's cold, when it's warm, or when there's sunshine hitting your screen. I like it when there's big contrast in applications on my screen. When it's sunny outside, I can still use it. Next to that, you can use it anywhere, in traffic, with your coworkers, at the library, anywhere. Also for all technologies, like desktop and mobile, but maybe even on your refrigerator, who knows? In your car, maybe using voice assistant, and assistive technology like screen readers are also important technologies. And also it's for everyone, no matter male, female, young, old, maybe with dyscalculia or other things, maybe disabled person, who knows? And also in every situation. So if you can't see or can't speak, can't hear, or maybe can't touch, or can't touch only with one hand because you hold a baby in your other arm, yeah, you should still be able to use applications on the web. So it's really about user needs and about the known barriers. And there are guidelines for this. So more specifically, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which help you in understanding these barriers and identify these barriers encountered by people with disabilities. Also, where they explain, these guidelines explain how to prevent and solve these particular issues. And if we take a look at the WCAG guidelines, it's here for a long time. It's there from the origination of web. It's there from the start. That means how important accessibility was to web from the beginning, and it's still important today. So if you look at WCAG, that's how you pronounce it actually, the guidelines are split into a couple of items, a couple of categories. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. P-O-U-R, POR. So let's go into depth into those categories. Perceivable. Perceivable is really about information and user interface components that must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive them. So for instance, meaningful order of content. It should make sense to you if you read a page that it has a logical ordering, right? Next to that, don't only use color to convey information. So an example is you would have a red warning item on the page, but maybe some people cannot see that it is red, so it would be wise to put an icon there as well with an exclamation mark. Then also it's important to have sufficient contrast, like I said already with the screen in the sunshine, that it should have sufficient contrast. And also do not restrict to a single orientation. So some people might have their phone mounted on their wheelchair, for instance, and are unable to turn it around. So we cannot restrict a single orientation because some people cannot flip their screen. So these are just a couple of examples of how perceivable is important and how some guidelines are there in WCAG. Then operable. First of all, I want to explain the terms interface components and navigation. So interface components is about buttons and drop-down items and input fields, those kinds of things. So things inside of a form. And then navigation is about anchor links. So clicking on an anchor, you navigate to a particular page. This is simple, basic web, but it's important to know these differences. So an important thing here is that it's keyboard operable. You should be able to tap through your application and it should just work. So working without a mouse. It should work like that. Because some people, they don't use a mouse. They have maybe a puff and sip thing in their mouth, and when they blow, they go tapping through the application. That's a way people could interact with your web content. Also a logical focus order. So I don't expect the tab to, when I tap, to jump from one part of the page to another part of the page. It should have a logical order again. And then also labels for user interface elements. So explaining what a user interface element is about. So for instance, next to your check mark, having the explanation that the terms and conditions check mark is actually that check mark that we're talking about. Then there's a big pitfall in operable. I see this quite often still today sometimes. So the problem with this one is a div is meaningless. It doesn't have a particular role, so it's not an interactive element. So if you would tap through your application, you would never reach this particular element. So this on-click action that's on there is not, cannot be activated or executed by a person that cannot focus to this particular element. So we could fix that, giving it a tab index, but come on, let's be real. Why not just make it a button, right? So that's also what it's really about. Just use the regular DOM elements that are there for you. And then we have understandable. Information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. An example is a language attribute that should be present on your HTML element. But also, if you have, for instance, a span with a different, with content of different language, then there you should also put that language attribute on there, telling the user that it is a different language. And then also do not change context unexpectedly. And what I mean by this is, for example, if you have a drop-down and you activate a particular item in a drop-down, you should not navigate to a different page, for instance. That's not what you should expect. A form where you have a drop-down should only submit the form, basically, and not change context in the sense of navigating to a different page, for instance. That's unexpected. And then robust. This is really about maximizing compatibility of user agents and assistive technology. Essentially, again, use the native elements. Then you're good, because out of the box, they provide an accessible name, role, and value. So what I mean by accessible name, role, and value is, for instance, the checkbox, like for instance, terms and conditions, checkbox, checked. That's accessible name, role, value. And it's important to have that for each and every interactive element. So this is actually how the accessibility tree and users using assistive technology gets their content presented at them. So we start with HTML, and then HTML is rendered towards a DOM tree, right? And we can interact with this DOM tree with JavaScript, and ultimately, the DOM tree can get painted to the screen, gets rendered, or alternatively, or it happens at the same time actually, it renders to an accessibility tree, which assistive technology natively can understand and present back to the user. So again, it's really about the basics here. The DOM tree is super, super important. So having the standard components and standard elements here, yeah, makes it work out of the box. Something that we do in our single page app oftentimes is client-side routing. So we use JavaScript to override the actions or the navigation actions that we have on anchor elements, right? We click on an anchor, and we do not go back to the server to fetch a new page. No, we execute some JavaScript to show something different on the page by using a router. But this basic workings of the web, like getting a page from the server and presenting it back, is actually what we should mimic for the user. Otherwise, it's again unexpectable. So clicking a link in the web means requesting a page from the web server. And when we do client-side routing, we should mimic this behavior. And we can do that in 3 easy steps. So you have to scroll back to the top of the document, and next to that, update the document title, because when you navigate to a different page, that page most of the time has a different name, right? And then focus on the first element in the body. So resetting the focus back to the top left corner, oftentimes, of the document again. So you get a new start, like the page has been refreshed. So that's essentially what you want to do. And here's a piece of pseudocode that you can manipulate a little bit and make it work for your router of choice. So you would have an on-route-change handler, and you would do a window scroll to top. You would have a reference to your title element and change the contents of that. And then you would set the focus on the first item in the body or the first element in the body. And there you go. It's accessible again. So let me talk to you about testing for accessibility and how to do that. So at ING, what we do ourselves is, of course, testing for accessibility, but we also have sometimes user tests with actual blind people or people with other impairments. And that's super interesting to see. It's also quite daunting and quite, shocking to see how people experience that. And yeah, it gives us a lot of work, but in the end, it's very nice to see and learn about how people can perceive your application. But to go into how we can test for ourselves, let's talk about first automation, because we are developers, right? We love automation. And luckily, Chrome nowadays Chromium-based browsers have great audit tools as part of Lighthouse. So when you would go to Lighthouse, you can put some check marks, and one of the check marks is actually accessibility. You can test for that as well. So it will run a couple of tests, and you would get some nice output. This tool is actually based on X, which is by DQ, and you can run X also in your CI, so you could have the same test results in your CI as well. This is an example of a result of my accessibility test on a page. As you can see, I have still some work to do, but it gives you a nice explanation on what you exactly need to do, and maybe also already you see it. Oh, damn. There are additional items that I need to manually check. So sorry, it's just not enough. You cannot always automatically detect all of the issues on your page. You need to do some manual work. A very silly example is this one. This is my cat, actually. I have it as an image on my website. And the alt tag says a cute dog. Well, there's no way that automation can detect this. Yeah, you could write some machine learning or something, but still, there's just manual work to do. So how could we do these manual tests? So luckily, again, in the browsers, there are many, many more tools coming every day. So one very, very nice tool is the accessibility tab. When you go on the Elements tab of your DevTools, and look for accessibility, you can actually see how the accessible name is derived from all of the attributes and contents of the DOM element. So as you can see here, I have a button, and the button has a label of NL Dutch language, and it's actually not coming from the contents. It's the contents was NL, but yeah, somehow that got demoted because we have an Aria label, and that's more important. So here you can see in what way the browser gives the accessible name and see where it comes from actually. And also now in Chrome you have a contrast checker. So when you inspect elements, as you can see, we see here the contrast score and a check next to it. So yeah, we're doing good here. Then the second thing that you need to do is control with your keyboard. Control your application with your keyboard. So use Tab, use Shift Tab to go back, and use Enter to follow links or submit forms, for instance. So check if the focus order makes sense. Check if it's logical. Also check for keyboard traps. Keyboard traps is when you get stuck in a loop when you tab around. That actually happens quite a lot. Also check the accessible name with the tool that I just presented to you. Next to that, turn CSS off. So when you turn CSS off, you can actually way easier see if the visual order is following the DOM order, because things do not get put by CSS in different places. So Firefox has an option underneath View, Page Style, No Style. You can disable CSS easily. So you can check if the order is logical. You can also check if there's maybe dangling dialogue content, I call it here. Maybe sometimes you have a dialogue on top of your screen, but the content is actually not inside of the DOM, but it's way behind, and then a screen reader only reaches it when you go to the complete end of the page. And that's not really in the logical order. Also important, the heading order. You should not jump from H1 to H4 back to H2, for instance. That's not logical at all. And then lastly, check with screen readers. Yeah, this one is pretty challenging, and I know a lot of you maybe have tried it and get annoyed by it. I sometimes get quite annoyed by it. And that's also why very important, the one over here, with control. When you enable it, push control, and you silence it. It's really a lifesaver, at least for me. And then when you have it turned on, you navigate through your application with your keyboard, and all of the accessible names and the roles and the values get announced by the screen reader. If you're a Windows user, please do not use a plugin. Also, that counts for OS X users. So a plugin is not what people use regularly. People use dedicated software for this, like VoiceOver or like NVDA for Windows. NVDA is free, and yeah, it's a market standard. Then another thing that you can do is landmarks. Landmarks provide a very powerful way to identify the organization and the structure of a web page. So you know a couple of these HTML5 elements, like nav, like main, like search, and think, okay, it's nice to use those, but what are they actually for? Well, they really enhance the accessibility of your page. Because when in VoiceOver you do Control-Option-U, you get a list of all the landmarks, and a user can just quickly jump to the search part of your page, or quickly jump towards the navigation part. And that's actually a very, very nice way to navigate your page. So to check out these landmarks without VoiceOver, you can install a Chrome extension. And another interesting thing that you can do with landmarks is navigate to them with skip links. And in this small video, I show you the skip links. So over here, we have the ING banking app. And when I do a first tab, second tab, third tab, I see actually links that help me skip to different parts of the application. So one of the most important things in our application is transferring money, obviously. So we put a skip link there. And when you now press enter, you directly go to the transfer money screen without tapping to the button and finding the button. It's just way faster. If you go to facebook.com, the application, it has also like a complete interface with skip links and a lot of functionality in there. It's quite interesting to see. And this is helping people a lot. Then also interesting, your phone is a great tool to test for accessibility. So On Android, you have Voice Assistant, and on iOS, you have Voice Over. And when you put your AirPods in the train, you could just easily test your website, web application on accessibility. So this is just a quick tip for me. Then, of course, lastly, we need to talk about why Aria. I touched it a little bit, but let's look into it a little bit as well. So why Aria is always very closely related to accessibility when we talk about it. A lot of people think, when I do accessibility, I need to start off with why Aria? Well, actually, it's the opposite. The rule number 1 of Aria is don't use Aria. Seriously, I didn't make this up. This is from the official documentation. Just use plain HTML elements. Aria is super, super powerful, but you can also mess up so greatly. So it's very dangerous. If you must create elements different than the plain elements that you have in HTML, take a look at these authoring practices. They have for each and every component that you can think of explained how people interact with those. What should happen on a tab, what should happen when you press the down arrow, the up arrow, those kinds of things. So it's explained quite well, so use that if you need it. But of course, it wouldn't be a good rule if there's an exception to it, right? So the only one exception is Aria Live. You should use this one quite extensively if you are doing single-page apps. Because with JavaScript, we dynamically update parts of the screen quite often, right? And we should notify the user that stuff has changed. We should announce that parts of the application have updated. So for instance, when we show dialogues or show notifications, we want to put an Aria Live attribute there and make it polite. Then it tells it in a nice, polite way that something has updated. So the key takeaway, stick to the basics, stick to the web basics, and mimic the web as it was intended. And make sure you're not building something like this. So I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm around at the booth of ING. You can talk to me about web components, about accessibility, about Hacker News, modular synthesizers. I have here a great resource if you want to learn about the basics of web accessibility. dquniversity.com has great curriculum. It's a good starting point if you want to learn more about this. And also you can look me up on LinkedIn if you want. Thanks, and have a great day.